Good morning. Glad that you're all here. And I wanted to sort of virtually welcome into the room my co-author, Amy McConnell Franklin, who happened to be a teacher of mine back in high school. So welcome, Amy. She's watching from United World College in Thailand with her students there. I wanted to begin today by telling you a story about a young man named Daniel. And Daniel was about almost 13 years old, living with his mother and baby sister in New Orleans when Hurricane Katrina slammed into Louisiana, destroying his home and his school, and then really everything that was familiar to him at that time. And his family actually ended up having to move about 12 times in the following 5 years. And of course, each time he was having to enter new communities and schools. And of all of the things that Daniel endured during that time, including having to be separated from his mother and baby sister in a shelter they were living in, and leaving behind cherished friendships, for him, by far, the most difficult was the bullying that he endured at those new schools he went to outside of New Orleans. And it was, not only the verbal harassing, but actually became physically violent at times. And it was happening in the hallways of school and on the school buses. And so, he couldn't even focus on learning. He wasn't safe within the walls of a school. And on one particular occasion, a really brutal attack, as his mother had walked him to the school bus, he tried to get onto the bus, and she recalled about 12 kids, a little bit older than him, actually jumped him. And at that point, he said, and his mother and he decided, I know I need to be in school, but this is just too dangerous, simply too dangerous. So Daniel spent the next year staying at home while his mother worked and caring for that baby sister. And then not until he was 15 were they able to move back to New Orleans, where he then was able to return to school. But as you can imagine, he was incredibly far behind, and no matter how motivated he was, he had a very difficult time catching up. And I share that story about Daniel because his experience is a great example of what children who endure these sorts of disruptions, let alone just being a child and trying to grow up, what they might endure. And I think of Katrina and events like this as Katrina was the catalyst for Daniel's own internal emotional storm. And those children who were bullying him, I'm guessing, had some internal emotional storm brewing as well. So I've got to figure out how to work this clicker. There we go. So the disruptions to the environment that are, part and parcel of this warming climate are also being felt inside our children as they cope with the consequences. And while we may not be able to stop climate change, we do have the ability to provide these children with the skills and adaptive strategies that they will need to handle the disruption to their life. And if we do not, we have ample research that shows us that they will have increased anxiety and depression. They will be more highly traumatized by these kinds of events, experience more conflict and social network disruption. So, they're spending a lot of time in schools. So we educators really need to rally to support them. Sadly, too few educational systems are preparing either the students or their teachers with the necessary skills. So I don't think it should be surprising that we're seeing the apathy and pessimism, even paralysis, and at the very worst, denial about climate change and some of the other things that are happening in our world right now. So the social and emotional learning skills that Amy and I have written about within this chapter, and we've couched them really specifically within climate change, but these strategies also, enhance development in general. These skills will help them handle, be able to engage more fully and navigate their thoughts and their feelings and then their actions so that they can handle these challenges. And we believe that these skills really need to be systematically woven throughout their education in all aspects, from the time they're very tiny in pre-K all the way up through university, and then of course at home and in their everyday experiences. So social scientists have sort of identified skills and behaviors that are essential to getting to mitigation and adaptation, which of course are the two primary strategies used to address climate change. And their research indicates that skills such as empathy, and my clicker is not working, empathy and intrinsic motivation, and then an awareness of our interconnectedness are key to creating the pro-environmental and pro-social choices, behaviors, and emotional responses that influence whether or not these people we will act to slow climate change or be able to cope with it. So these are social and emotional skills, and they're easily addressed within our formal and informal places of learning as social and emotional learning programming. So what is social and emotional learning? And I'll use the acronym SEL probably quite a lot within this. CASEL, short for the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, and they're an internationally recognized leader in research, policy, and practice of SEL. They've defined it as the process through which children and adults acquire and effectively apply the knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, your own and those of others, to set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain mutually beneficial relationships, and then also make responsible decisions. And it's in the blending of these cognitive and affective and behavioral skills that creates a social and emotional competence, allowing for one to be driven by their internal values and belief systems, and then being able to make the choices to act in accordance with those beliefs to create positive change, whether it be merely on an individual level or on a more global level, as we're talking about in this EarthEd edition. So there's a lot on this slide, and it's in the chapter, but what I'd like you to focus on is just that color wheel in the middle. These are the 5 competencies of social and emotional learning according to Castle's model, and they are self and social awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, and relationship skills. And fortunately, there's a ever-growing body of evidence that says that these skills, like bicycle riding, are teachable and learnable, but one must have explicit instruction and then many opportunities for permanent practice. This research also, the outcomes over here in the yellow, both short and long-term outcomes are seen, where we're seeing obviously better social and emotional skills, more positive behaviors and attitudes, leading to fewer conduct disorders and expulsions and suspensions in schools, less stress, and then also increased academic performance. And in fact, a large meta-analysis of around 270,000 students showed that there was an average increase of 11 percentage point gain on standardized test scores. And then, so in the long term, it should follow, and it does, that we're seeing fewer high school dropouts, that they're more college and career ready, they have longer term, healthier relationships, they're not entering into the criminal justice system at the same numbers, hallelujah. And we're also seeing this idea of a more engaged citizenship and healthier citizens. So those outcomes show that there is a solid economic case likely to social and emotional learning. And in fact, for every dollar we spend, we get about $11 back. And so it really literally pays to take the necessary time, a little bit of time to teach these skills. And the savings are showing up in decreased cost into the criminal justice system and healthcare system. And then, of course, better job opportunity and advancement. And so we always reduce it to money for some reason, but if that's what we need to do, even in the evidence of all these outcomes, I'm happy that we have the research now. So what do we get for that money that we invest? These are the characteristics of a socially and emotionally competent child. And I believe that these skills actually are lying within all of our children. They exist within all of our children. And it is in the intentional naming and acknowledging and then nurturing that really brings them to life. And I don't know about you, but I can't think of a single problem I have or that we might hold collectively that would not be better solved by some of us, most of us being empathic, culturally aware, ethical, optimistic, purposeful, able to engage our resources. It's not a complete list, but a really good place to start. I wanted to point out that we use the term social and emotional learning, and in fact, that is fairly recognizable internationally, though this sort of programming shows up in under other headings. Peace education and emotional intelligence, restorative practices. I spend a lot of my work in restorative justice and restorative practices in schools. Mindfulness, global citizenship, and ethics. These skills that are taught within this are ancient skills. They're familiar to all of us. It's not really rocket science, right? We've had to use them to live together and work together and constructively engage in conflict together over centuries. So that's a little bit of the rationale for social and emotional learning and a little bit about what it's about. What I'd like to do is spend just the next few minutes of my talk sharing some examples of Amy's and my work in the field. And the first that I'll start with is from Amy's school. She is the director of social and emotional learning at the United World College of Thailand, and that is actually a K-12 program. And you can see this is a systematic, for some reason you don't see the whole thing there, but this is a systematic implementation of social and emotional learning, and that means that every stakeholder to that education, the administrators, the faculty, the staff, including the bus drivers, the janitors, secretarial staff, et cetera, of course the students and many of their parents receive this explicit training and also are expected to practice it within the confines of that education and abroad. So I'm sorry that you can't read this, but their mission statement says that UWC makes education a force to unite people, nations, and cultures for peace and a sustainable future. And then their educational goal says, we seek to realize our highest human potential, cultivate genuine happiness, and take mindful and compassionate action. You can see that their intention, within these two statements, that their intention is to make these types of skills live. And in fact, they spend 3.5 hours at UWC Thailand every week explicitly cultivating things like empathy and compassion, authentic expression. They spend time in mindfulness, stillness, and movement, and then reflection. They also include the responsible consumption of media, sex education, and health education as part of this programming. And this sort of systematic implementation is the most powerful to get to those outcomes that I shared with you. And you can imagine how wonderful it must be to be a staff or student learning and working in this type of environment. Second example is a woman I've worked with in Colorado. She is a science teacher. Her name is Katy Malone. And she teaches environmental ethics and ecology. She's really passionate that her students not only understand their impact on the world, but that they have this ability, if they cultivate it, to change their own life and the world with it. And her students, many of them resemble those living on the front lines of climate change. A lot of poverty, some are in fact homeless, and they've endured multiple disruptions to their young lives and have experienced a lot of trauma. So what Katy does is she uses ecology to bridge to provide a bridge sort of between their internal emotional interactions and then to those communities that they are part of. She first engages her students in building their own climate. Up here on the left is an emotional literacy charter and a feelings charter, and this comes from the Ruler curriculum out of Yale Center for the Emotional Intelligence. They decide how do they want to feel, and then what are the feelings we're going to need to feel that way? What are the behaviors specifically we need to feel that way? And then how will we handle conflict if we can't? So once she's helped them create their classroom climate and what their intention is, she'll start talking about soil, using this idea of a mutually beneficial relationship. So what do we need to give to soil, and what does it give us back in return, and how do we keep that cycle going? She has a wonderful assignment where she takes all that work that they do in relationship and this idea of sense of place and has them reflect on how that helps create their land ethic and environmental ethic, and then what are the decisions that they need to make to create that, bring that to fruition. So I'll let you read this, but what Katy is doing is helping her students develop this awareness, self and social awareness, that helps them feel not disconnected from nature, which leads to apathy and disregard, but connected and with a real sense of responsibility and interdependence. Katy is a very passionate teacher. She has received a lot of pushback in her school, unfortunately, for her touchy-feely ways, but her students are more engaged, they're showing up in school, and and she's happier teaching by including these. My last example is from a program that I've helped create, and it's a school-based program, but it takes place on a ranch in the foothills of Colorado. And what we're doing is using equine facilitated learning to teach these skills. And the horse is a perfect way to sort of give power to these skills. Horses have huge clusters of mirror neurons, and they're able to reflect human behavior. So it's this incredible opportunity for exploration and transformation of behavior. And what's happening here in this slide, these kids are from middle schoolers, and they're the culture crashers. They're disruptive, they are causing trouble all the time, they can't learn, and they're really vulnerable. But we talk about predator-prey dynamics, and they show up looking like predators, but they're really feeling like prey inside. So the horse is an amazing way to connect. So Leo up here on the right, he's just totally in your face. So we've paired him with a horse that's totally in your face. And what he has to do, because he wants to connect with that horse, is start co-regulating. And they started not being able to walk around the arena together, and then we found him in this moment. This is that congruent moment. Mateo is leading with the horse's language of intention. He's done a lot of work, and he was so proud getting that horse to follow him without leads. You can see his intention. And then this is Darius, who I worked with last week, and we did a breathe with exercise where he matches his breathing. He's got hair all over him and loves it. But this is a super angry kid, just can't show up to learn. And he's matching his breathing, which calms his limbic system, his fight or flight reaction, and helps him be more engaged for learning. And these are the relationships that they need to build before they can do their favorite thing, which is riding. We spend 3 weeks building these relationships before we ride. And that's where you see the vulnerability and the caution and fear transform into this trust and confidence and real engagement. And this is happy, and she's riding around the arena here with her hands at her side and her eyes closed. And we call this, your insides are matching your outsides. So and it's all very heartwarming, but we are tracking outcomes. And what we're seeing is that, I think the one that I'll share with you that's really powerful is these kids are missing about half of all school days before we begin our 8-week session. From the beginning of that session till the 3rd month following, post-session, we're seeing they're showing up at school about 90% of the time. You can't learn if you can't be there, so it's a really powerful tool and a connection to nature. It's through that empathy that they build that they start making more pro-environmental behaviors and choices. So I have so many examples I'd love to share, but what I think the real message here is that when children receive this sort of programming, they are more apt to take benevolent action. They are more engaged in their communities and taking responsibility. They're healthier, they're more resilient, and they're future ready. They aren't just skilled for the 21st century. They're skilled for the unknown, right? I want to close with this quote by Rachel Kessler. She was an early pioneer in social and emotional learning and wrote a wonderful book called The Soul of Education. If we think we are only teaching to their heads, then we better meet the kids at the front door of the school, because they're showing up with their whole heart and soul. And I think Daniel was showing up at each one of those schools with his whole heart and soul, ready to learn. And how different it would have been had he come into those places and they were, set up to cultivate, intentionally to cultivate mutually beneficial relationships. And they handled conflict in restorative ways that built compassion and empathy. And he had a chance for some friendship. And that those children who bullied him and the teachers who stood by instead embodied these social and emotional learnings, these skills, this competence. We have the knowledge and the tools to engage these children and help them through these challenging times. And I'm not saying imagine if we could do it, we need to do it and start now. And it's the work in this EarthEd book by these authors that inspires me so much and makes me feel like it's really possible. And thank you for being here.